Ferrari has produced some of the most beautiful, successful and iconic Grand Prix cars ever made. But it has also had its fair share of failures over the years, with the 2020 Ferrari SF1000 not the first car to underachieve. We have selected some of the most famous Maranello flops from the past 7 decades. Some of them have suffered from similar problems to the 2020 Ferrari, which was primarily limited by the engine thanks to clarifications to the regulations, while others failed for entirely different reasons. Let us know what you think of our selections in the comments below, and see if you can spot the bad Ferraris that missed the cut. Ferrari F2005. The 2005 Ferrari is unique on this list because it is the only car that won a World Championship race. But given the race in question was the farcical 6-car United States Grand Prix in 2005, and the opposition comprised the bottom 2 teams in the championship, Jordan and Minardi, it was a victory born of circumstances, not speed. The main problem was the Bridgestone tyres. A late rule change aimed at curbing Ferrari's dominance outlawed tyre changes in races, which was bad news for Bridgestone. Its stiffer sidewall construction forced it to run harder compounds to cope with the heat generated, handing the initiative to the more compliant Michelin rubber. There were also a raft of changes to the technical regulations as the FIA slowed the cars down, with the front wing raised, the rear wing moved forward, the diffuser height reduced, and the bodywork in front of the wheels more restricted. Adapting to these took up significant resources, with Ferrari having to redesign its gearbox to better repackage the rear suspension and diffuser for the new rules. So while the tyres were the primary weakness, the car itself was not optimised to the new regulations. Indianapolis 1-2 finish aside, Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello were only occasional visitors to the podium, but did score consistently enough to give Ferrari third in the Constructors' Championship, with the help of that 1-2 in America. Ferrari 642 and 643. The Ferrari 641 was a beautiful car that set new standards for aerodynamic design and almost won the World Championship in the hands of Alain Prost in 1990. It was so successful that Ferrari opted to go into the following season with an evolution, the 642, that showed prodigious pace in testing but couldn't live up to the expectations on track. Designed by Steve Nichols, building on the work of Enrique Scalabroni, John Barnard and aerodynamicist Henri Durand, who had all left the team, the 642 was effectively rooted in the 1989 and 90 Ferraris. Given Ferrari's refusal to produce an all-new car had caused Scalabroni to leave, it was clear all was not well. The 642 wasn't a bad car, but aerodynamic testing had been sacrificed to support the 1990 title bid, meaning it wasn't a big enough step forward. Despite revisions early in the season, including new side pods, it was clear a new car was needed. The 643 finally appeared at the French Grand Prix, with the same rear end as its predecessor but a revised front, including a raised nose. Prost fought for victory, finishing second, but this proved to be a false dawn, and the 643 failed to win a race. In the background, Ferrari was being torn apart by politics. This led to changes in management and the eventual departure of Prost, which we've explained in great detail in its own video on this channel. Ferrari F186. While the 1986 Ferrari had a powerful engine after major changes to the power plant that had limited it in 1985, its biggest problem was the aero. Ferrari had fallen behind on this side of the game thanks to dithering over committing to build its own wind tunnel, a project which wasn't green-lighted until late in the 1986 season. As a result, it neither had the downforce nor the traction to carry the speed in the corners and get the power down effectively, not helped by the turbo lag. With Ferrari finishing 5th in the Constructors' Championship and only a handful of podium finishes for Stefan Johansson and Michele Alboreto, the decision was made to sign design genius John Barnard from McLaren to oversee a revival. Ferrari 801. One of Ferrari's common failings over the years has been running evolutions of cars that were once successful and falling behind as a result. The Lancia Ferrari D50 won the World Championship in the hands of Juan Manuel Fangio in 1956, but was reworked for 1957 as the Ferrari 801. Built around a modified and stiffer chassis that now fully incorporated the fuel tanks in place of the distinctive pannier style, that were mounted on the side of the D50, the cockpit structure was also modified. This gave the car a sleeker look, with the front end also changing to a more low-profile design, but it also added weight. The front and rear suspension were largely based on that of the D50, with some minor tweaks, including the introduction of more robust steering arms, although a new front suspension was introduced during the season. The engine was a more compact evolution of the D50's 2.5-litre V8, but this came at the cost of a little power. Overall, the car was heavy, and a lack of power wasn't made up for by the drag reduction of the tighter design. The F1 game had moved on, and the Ferrari 801 never won a World Championship race, while Van Wall and the aged but extensively revised Maserati 250F in Juan Manuel Fangio's inspired hands did all the winning. Ferrari F93A. The Ferrari F93A was originally conceived as an interim car to be replaced by a new design from the returning John Barnard in the middle of 1993. But once it became clear that active suspension, among other driver aids, would be banned for 1994, it was used for the entire 93 season. It had several weaknesses. The Harvey Postlethwaite designed F93A was an evolution of the unsuccessful 1992 car, of which more later, but suffered from a lack of aerodynamic testing during development given it was not intended to be raced for long. The second problem was that Ferrari had suffered from a lack of commitment to its active suspension system, and while it had run in the final two races of 1992 on Nicola Laurini's car, Barnard was forced to put a significant effort into overseeing a vastly improved system. Despite significant progress, this was a technological dead end by regulation, and Ferrari still lagged far behind the more advanced systems used by Williams, McLaren and Benetton by the end of the year. The 3.5-litre V12 engine was also a limiting factor. Thirsty, and without the extra power to justify the added size, Ferrari even struck a deal with Honda for technology transfer in an attempt to make progress. The engine was an evolution of the same design that was used for the return to normally aspirated engines in 1989, and was showing its age. There were no wins and just 3 podium finishes, as Ferrari finished a distant 4th in the championship. Ferrari 312-69. The Ferrari 312 had won 3 World Championship races since its debut in 1966, and might even have won that year's championship had John Surtees not walked away mid-season. But the 312-69 that was raced in 1969 was unreliable, uncompetitive, and little more than a stopgap, while Ferrari focused on the all-new 1970 Ferrari 312B, amid serious financial problems. While there were visual similarities between the 312-68 raced the previous season, the overall shape of the 312-69 was very different thanks to the introduction of a new flatter nose. It used the V12 engine that was coming to the end of its competitive life and was underpowered by 1969 standards. Although modified for 1969 and a little more compact, helping to offer a cleaner airflow to the rear wing, the anticipated power gains were not there. It also didn't produce a consistent power curve and was prone to failures, costing Chris Amon victory in the Spanish Grand Prix after he had inherited the lead. The 312-69 managed just 1 podium finish, Amon's 3rd place at Zandvoort, while Ferrari didn't even bother attending the German Grand Prix on its way to 6th in the Constructors' Championship. Ferrari F14T. Ferrari was not ready for Formula One's major rule change in 2014. Having started work on its 1.6-litre V6 turbo hybrid engine package too late, it had the weakest power unit on the grid in a season when it was hugely significant and the Mercedes dominance began. With a car that was decent aerodynamically but nothing special, it added up to just 2 podium finishes and a distant 4th in the World Championship. Other than Fernando Alonso coming within 3 laps of winning the Hungarian Grand Prix before being passed by Daniel Ricciardo, it was a desultory season. Overweight and underpowered, the engine package started the season with savage torque delivery that was only gently improved as the season progressed. The hybrid system itself was the biggest weakness, particularly in race conditions where it was unable to harvest aggressively enough. While on a qualifying lap, the Ferrari could take the fight to cars running the second best Renault engine, in a race it was down on power and struggled. The failure of the Ferrari F14T played a part in Fernando Alonso falling out with Ferrari and walking away, while team principal Stefano Domenicali and engine chief Luca Marmarini were also ousted. Ferrari 312 T5. The dismal failure of the Ferrari 312 T5 in 1980 is living proof of the old adage that if you stand still, you go backwards. In 1979, with the 312 T4, Ferrari took a World Championship double with Jody Scheckter taking the title ahead of teammate Gilles Villeneuve. But in 1980, Ferrari scored a feeble 8 points and never finished higher than 5th. But it wasn't anything Ferrari did that turned triumph in 1979 to disaster in 1980. The problem was that it didn't do enough. With ground effect technology advancing rapidly, the writing was on the wall in 1979, with Williams winning 5 of the last 7 races thanks to Patrick Head's mastery of ground effects with the FW07. The Ferrari 312 T5 was still fundamentally limited by chassis architecture from the pre-ground effect T3. The Type 015 flat 12 boxer engine limited the potential of ground effect aerodynamics at a time when they were essential. Ferrari focused its efforts on development of the new turbo engine for 1981 and a dramatically different car, the 126C. Meanwhile, it plodded on with the venerable 312 T5 in 1980, taking its worst ever Constructors' Championship finish of 10th. Ferrari F92A. The 1992 Ferrari has a distinction of being the Ferrari with the biggest average pace deficit to the front, underlining just how far it was behind the standard-setting Williams-Renault FW14B. The biggest problem was the 3.5 litre V12 engine that was down on power, unreliable and heavy on fuel use. It also suffered oil system problems early in the year that meant it didn't produce its maximum power and contributed to the unreliability. Ferrari worked its way through a huge number of engines that year, which didn't help. Jean-Claude Migiot's design featured the innovative twin floor, effectively an extreme undercut whereby the side pod bodywork doesn't meet the floor in the conventional way. But drivers generally found the car to be inconsistent and unpredictable. An evolution of the car, the F92AT, made its debut at Monza and eased some of the problems thanks to a modified suspension design and a new version of the twin floor, but the engine was still a big limitation. While the pace improved a little, it was unreliable, and overall Ferrari managed only 2 podium finishes, courtesy of Jean Alesi. Nicola Larini, who replaced Ivan Capelli for the final 2 races of the season, ran with Ferrari active suspension, but the unrefined system was still too imprecise and unreliable to be effective. So what do you think? Did we miss anything? Would you have changed our ranking? Please give us a like if you enjoyed this, and remember to subscribe to keep up with everything we're doing. And perhaps take a look at our video ranking every current F1 team's worst car, which includes the Ferrari F92A, as well as the worst designs from the other 9 teams currently in Formula 1.